Welcome to HSBC Global Viewpoint, the podcast series that brings together business leaders and industry experts to explore the latest global insights, trends, and opportunities. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes. Thanks for listening, and now on to today's show.
Hello from HSBC Hong Kong and welcome to Under the Banyan Tree, where we put Asian markets and economics in context. I'm Fred Newman, Chief Asia Economist.
And I'm Herald and Fred, the Head of Asian Equity Strategy. We've got a fresh take on the tariff story for you today with a focus on Southeast Asia.
That's right. Despite the obstacles to trade that tariffs create, ASEAN economies actually stand to see their market share in the US increase. How is that possible? Here to tell us is ASEAN Economist Aris Dacanay, our guest in the studio this week. Let's get the conversation started right here under the Banyan Tree. Well, we're joined here by Aris Dacanay, our specialist on ASEAN economies.
Welcome, Aris.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Not the first time, Aris. You're a regular here under the Banyan Tree, I have to say. We're delighted to have you here, and partly because you wrote a very interesting report of late looking at how Southeast Asia, the ASEAN economies, might sort of fare under these growing tariffs by the U.S. And I think the general assumption is that higher tariffs in the U.S. ultimately are not good for economies in Southeast Asia that export a lot to the U.S. But you found actually that, yes, there are some headwinds, but there are also some positives. Enlighten us.
So, fun fact, did you know that ever since March of this year, and for the first time since the year 2000, the U.S. has imported more from Southeast Asia than from China by around $61 billion.
Wait, this is a fun fact for me because this is a surprise. Everybody always talks about the big trade between China and the U.S., but you're saying that Southeast Asia as a group exports more to the U.S.
Indeed.
Wow.
Now, wait. There might be a statistical mirage here.
No, because I'm thinking as well.
So is that partly just goods being rerouted where they slap on a label? They ship stuff from China to Vietnam, put a different label on and send it to U.S.?
So some may be re-exports, but some are actually a genuine increase of the market share, or at least the U.S. generally buy more goods from Southeast Asia than from China. And they are very specific goods. But they're particularly goods where the tariff rates, or at least the U.S. tariffs, are exempted.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is that there is a lot of local production going on in Southeast Asia. It's not just transshipments.
But even for the transshipments, is that the case? Or there must be transshipments taking place, right? So China goes to Vietnam, they put a sticker on it and goes to the U.S. Or am I mistaken here?
I do have to say that even though there are certain components, or at least a lot of components from China that is being re-exported through Southeast Asia, they are still being assembled by Southeast Asian labor.
Okay, so something happens and it's just on the sticker,
yes,
but it's actually
still growth.
They assemble or they put it together or whatever it is, right? Okay, good.
So a lot of genuine production in Southeast Asia. Now, why would there still be a genuine increase in production in Southeast Asia compared to China? Why is it that we still see production moving from China to Southeast Asia? Why is China losing market share and ASEAN is gaining market share?
So we have to look at it on a by-industry basis. And this U.S. tariff regime, there are some industries that are exempted from U.S. tariffs, and you could actually see that goods that are exempted from these tariffs are actually where growth is coming from.
Wait. For me, just to quickly understand, right? But I thought there were just tariffs slapped on these countries, so 20, 30%. So all these goods are being impacted. Or you say that there are particular goods where they have much lower tariffs, and that's where the advantage is.
Or at least a lower tariff than China.
Okay.
A larger tariff advantage. These are automobiles, fully built and parts. These are your lumber products, such as your cabinets from Vietnam, your sofas
Furniture.
from Indonesia.
Yeah.
So just to get this right, so you're saying under the current tariffs, the new tariffs, actually a lot of sort of exemptions or different rules for individual industries. And in these areas, Southeast Asia has actually lower tariffs than China has. And therefore, Southeast Asia has a competitive advantage.
Indeed.
Yes. Wow.
Indeed.
Give us an example.
Yeah.
So let's say HDDs, hard disk drives.
Hard disk drive, okay.
5 years ago, it was HDDs in laptops. Now it's SSDs. But HDDs has basically facing a renaissance.
Oh, yeah?
Data centers need a lot of HDDs.
That's right.
And there's a lot of data centers that's being built in the US.
So
But
where did they get it from?
so China is the number one producer of HDDs. A close second is Thailand. But an HDD in Thailand is now 20% cheaper because of tariff rates, the wider differential tariff advantage, than China. So the US has shifted its purchases of HDDs from China
To Thailand.
to Thailand.
Despite there being tariffs, it's just lower tariffs than in China. That's interesting.
That's interesting.
But does that also apply if I want to buy a sofa in the U.S.? If I was American buying a sofa from China, now I have these tariffs. It's much more expensive. Do I then buy a Vietnamese sofa now?
Indeed, Vietnam produces a lot of sofas. Indonesia produces a lot of sofas. And the Philippines actually produces a lot of high-end sofas, those that are made in rattan.
But sofas are only a small market, right? So HDDs, these hard disk drives, that I can see that is something that's really significant, right?
Well, you also mentioned automotive,
Oh, yeah,
semiconductors,
true. Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of products here, right?
That's a lot of products, indeed. So SSDs, you have even pet food.
So the picture that emerges from here, so what I'm surprised about, one, is that ASEAN is exporting a lot and is now a bigger exporter to the US than China. And secondly, although I presume trade is down and growth is down because of these tariffs, for ASEAN there are kind of, call it, mitigating factors. It's probably not as bad, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we started off saying that the tariffs are still not good for these economies. It's just in certain sectors we're seeing ASEAN actually gaining market share. So we're still left with a bit of a growth challenge here for the region overall.
So what can these policymakers then do? So in ASEAN, they are being supported to a certain extent by market share gains in exports. So the export sector is not as bad, but they need to do something. What levers can they pull?
So a lot of these Southeast Asian economies have actually used fiscal policy in 2025 to try to pick up the slack in terms of trade. So, for example, you have Thailand with a expansionary policy, Indonesia, and for the Philippines, it actually went to a different direction. For the Philippines, they are in a gradual consolidation of fiscal resource, but instead of spending more, they decided to spend wisely, wiser in a way, that you get to spend less on projects that you think
that is not
are
doing
not doing too much, and spend more on social aspects.
So they've
like
done
more
much
classrooms,
more targeting for
yes.
kind of spending. Okay.
That's interesting. Southeast Asia is so export dependent, and if there are tariffs coming through, even if you gain market share in some sectors, where are the opportunities then for these economies? So let's take a quick break here, and then we come back. We'll talk about the domestic story.
So we've learned so far from Aris here that actually the exports are doing relatively better. They are gaining market share in ASEAN, so that's a good thing. But these are still large domestic markets, right? I mean, Indonesia's got 270, 280 million people. Vietnam is probably about 100. Philippines,
115.
Yes. So these are actually, sometimes we forget about these. These are actually very large places, a lot of people living there. And these are domestic-oriented markets. So what levers can they pull to deal with this slowdown in growth?
We have to relate it to how exports translate to the domestic economy. And these tariffs are mostly focused on manufacturing. And you notice that these ASEAN economies that are more focused on manufacturing, job creation isn't really doing that well.
Yeah, that's
and
a pity.
Because
right?
of
So
that,
it doesn't translate into jobs for people.
Yes. So because of that, a lot of these governments, a lot of these economies have tried to use the fiscal and monetary levers to try to pick up the slack.
So basically spending by the government
yes.
and interest rates are being cut.
But you mentioned something before the break, Aris, and that is the quality of fiscal spending. And I want to pick you up on that because if really the idea here is to create more of a domestic demand, you really probably need to focus on infrastructure, on
improved logistics,
the services sector, just to generate underlying growth. But the risk must then also be that maybe some of the spending goes into less productive uses. I'm thinking, for example, subsidies, just spending vouchers, for example, which give you a short-term
kind of feeling good. You can spend on something, but then it peters out, right? It's not sustainable.
Do we see signs of this more structural focus coming in? I think Vietnam very much focus on the infrastructure.
So you do have Vietnam and the Philippines focusing more on infrastructure, but we have to also look at it at the lens that we just came from COVID-19. A lot of these people were just recently employed fiscal stimulus, got a lot of debt. So you have to take in note the room of fiscal policy. Philippines does not have a large room.
And let's also be frank, we've seen people coming to the streets across ASEAN because I can understand this now, where this comes from. There's not enough job creation. The economies are being hit. Fiscal spending takes place, but some of that leaks.
COVID was tough on
COVID
people
was
in
really
Southeast
tough.
Asia. Yeah.
So for a lot of people, this has been a couple of really difficult years. And I can understand there's a sort of sometimes frustration boils over, right? Yeah.
So there's pressure in Southeast Asia to be able to employ fiscal policy that directly translates to spending immediately.
Yeah.
So for example, you have Thailand with the co-payment scheme, you have the Indonesia with the free meals program, but with economies that have a tighter fiscal space, for example, the Philippines,
They have to be more targeted.
They have to be more targeted.
And this is Fred's point, that actually that might be good because that targeted means you put something in place that is sustainable for the next couple of years. And it's so easy sometimes to give out vouchers or do something else that feels good now, but is really peters out after 6 months.
Nevertheless, the broader point here is I think that, yes, exports are a bit at risk from tariffs in the U.S., but ASEAN has some opportunities in some sectors to expand market share. But there needs to be a focus on the domestic economies. And there's a lot of potential there in all these markets. And maybe for the final thought, Herald, equity markets,
yes.
They should be benefiting ultimately from a focus on domestic markets because often the export sector is not what's represented on the stock market.
No, but this is why I found this discussion really interesting because for me, if I look at the equity market, growth is under pressure for a lot of corporates. But there's a lot of hope that things will improve. And this comes back that exports are weak, the economies are weak, but there is this fiscal stimulus taking place. And that should then translate into better businesses, more sales and profits for companies. But we're not quite sure where we stand on this front. And this is why the ASEAN markets are struggling a little bit. I mean, all the excitement at the moment is North Asia, AI and these sort of things. But it could well be that if this works, then next year, focus will be back on those markets.
Well, gentlemen, this reminds me a little bit of China, actually. We're looking at a hopeful growth rotation from the export sector to the domestic side. So ASEAN is, in that sense, similar to China. But it's fascinating research, Aris, on the ASEAN region here and reminding us that even if there are headwinds on growth, there are sectors where actually ASEAN is still doing okay, such as I think I'll be ending up buying my sofa from Vietnam.
And I have refurbishing my house. I might look at Vietnamese sofas or maybe the Philippine sofas.
Yes,
the high-end ones.
Yeah, those are high-end ones. Yeah. But anyways, thanks for joining us on the Banyan Tree,
yes,
Aris, and
see you
hope
next
to
time.
Invite you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to the end of another great conversation here under the Banyan Tree. Thanks, everybody, for listening around the world. And please do subscribe to us in our sister podcast, The Macro Brief, if you haven't done so already.
Under the Banyan Tree is an HSBC Global Investment Research production. Thanks for joining us and talk to you again next week.
Thank you for joining us at HSBC Global Viewpoint. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes.